Welcome to the MBA Risk Management Program with our special emphasis for MBA 503. In 503, we expand the concept of risk using the basic project templates we're using. In 516, we spend almost a week and a half or more on this subject, and we integrate this in with the procurement strategy part of project management. So you will see much more of this in an expanded way in MBA 516. A key part of our work in MBA 516 is a part that we don't cover much in 503. It's on risk planning, your risk management plan. The assignment in 516 is for the team to write a comprehensive risk plan, management plan for an organization or company. Part of that plan will help details how you address risk, what tools you use, what methods you use, the feedback, items like probability and impact are all covered in this area. Again, we'll cover that in more detail in 516. I think it's better after you've had your intern experience to help you get a better idea of how companies work. But this is a really critical tool, and we'll go into more depth on a lot of these tools and areas. The first step we want to do in the 503 activity is to identify those risks. What's the maximum activity or risk we can see? And this is an iterative process. It's the process repeated to find new risks throughout the program. And when identified, we look for ways to respond and identify those. So risk management is not passive. It's not simply collecting data. It's actively looking for risk and risk issues and then developing a plan to mitigate or change those risks. Like all parts of project management, there are critical success factors. The risk part of that needs to link the objectives. We need to have clear ownership. Complete risk statements. We'll go through that in a few minutes. You have to be objective. We have to repeat this. It has to be comprehensive. The earlier we detect something, the better, and we have to watch for those new risks that come up, and they will. And as we look at risk, remember we've talked before about we want to look not only at the present, but the past and the future. In our project for 503, that's a little hard because we're kind of making one up from the ground up. But as you gain more experience and as you go to your companies, through your internships and full-time employment, identifying risk needs to look at all three phases of the timeline. What tool do we use? There's a whole variety of tools. We definitely want to make sure we talk to the stakeholders, and that will become, you'll see that more as you gain more experience in business. We want to use creative thinking tools. How do we find those items are there? How do we find those best tools to pull them out? You want to build your ability with these tools and techniques, and we'll talk a lot, and you'll see a little symbol on the charts about the toolbox. And again, we want to look at least three of the tools for past, present, and future. And one of the key tools we're going to introduce, and that tool is in your tab, your workbook tab, is the risk register. And we'll walk through the risk register for the 503 program. What you'll find is the risk register in this tab is not the only one. There's many versions of risk registers for sale, for free, passed down from people. And when we work with a company, one thing we try to do is not go in and say you have to use a new format of something, but we work with them to analyze the tools they're using to make sure they're covering the needs. And one thing as a best practice we found, it's important for us to go through and help the company come to a common core of a risk register. That improves the training for the people, and it also really makes the stakeholders have a better communication path if they have just one tool or one standard tool family to look at. So let's take a look at the risk tab in our workbook. I've pulled up a copy of the risk book. I've added some things to my copy that you don't have in yours. I broke down on these columns from row 14 to 17, kind of the phases where we will go through. And we're going to first identify the risk, and then we're going to assess those risks, then we're going to develop our response, and then we're going to talk about our ability to manage and control. The next slide is going to talk about how we write those risks down. And what we're going to do is we write them down in kind of a meta language, and not just that Joe's an issue or that we have a zoning issue. So in this case, we want to write basically a sentence using a metadata format, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you see the first one, it says, because of the availability of Joe in January, the project could be delayed. The next one, a risk is presented with the zoning changes requested for our planned building. This could delay the start of the project. Those are all statements that talk about the risk and how we use that language. So this is the first phase of risk management, is to identify. Notice I'm trying to identify all those first in that first column. A good practice for you is to learn to expand the rows of the risk register to capture all the data. Here's our little meta-language type definitions. For all risk, we want to have a clear statement. You want to have it so someone can pick it up and read it and understand what the issue is. Kind of the this phrasing we have down here, because of, and then one or more of the causes, a risk might occur which would lead to one or more effects. You can change around that structure, but just try to have that general format of you're trying to define the reason for, the cause of, and then we identify the risk, and it might occur which will lead to one or more effect. Again, this is a real good tool for you to go through that and do this. Keys to any tool, tips for a risk register: enter your data, obviously keep it current. We've talked about revision control before, keep those past records. Make it a working team, part of your team. Schedule your updates and share with your team. Again, these tools are all good, but they got to be kept current. It's not a one-time only activity. That's the big challenge of project management. It's great to plan, but you got to keep going day after day at a time, or 1 week at a time. One of the formats we like to use in this part of the course is to go to look at tools. We really want to build up your MBA toolbox. So as we look at tools, the left side will be strength, then we'll look at weaknesses, and then critical success factors for those. Again, we'll post copies of these slides so you can have a clearer view of the data on the slide. Remember you're doing your charters and you did those assumptions and constraints? Well, there's one of your first place to look at the risk. So again, they're simple statements, but again, a key factor to the right, it requires a comprehensive list. Learn to understand assumptions and constraints. What are you assuming and what are your constraints? Brainstorming, a very popular tool. One we'll practice in class on when we meet, as we talk about this area. One of the big things we need with brainstorming is good facilitation. Also, one of the things that really helps that is a concept from PMI called risk breakdown structure. They think that's one of the strongest tools in this whole array available for us, and we'll show you what a risk breakdown structure looks like. Another tool that we'd like to introduce to you in case you haven't seen it is called a cause and effect, or Ishikawa diagram. And it's a tool where you use a visual representation. Your diagram can become quickly or complex, which is really easy, and you want to make sure you have the right items on your chart. And now you can see the third name to this chart, called the fishbone. And basically, this is just an example where you have example of fishbone. You can break down key areas and break down the subsections of those. This tool sometimes really helps people look at and analyze problems. This is a tool you definitely want to have in your MBA toolbox. Checklist. You may not have these for the projects you're working on now, but as you go into your internships, there may be checklists or activities available for you to use on a project. Ask for these. Again, they really help if you can get this information to go through that checklist. Think of yourself as a pilot starting your pre-flight. You have a structure to go through your checklist. Same thing for quality project management. Another key tool is to review your documents. A lot of times you'll have a history or a file built for all your data coming in. And it really is a key thing to do is go back and look at all the data, the email, and make sure you've captured all those issues that have been presented to you as a project team. A lot of times industry knowledge database, going out and finding information about the industry in the libraries, on the open internet. These are areas for you. But make sure it's relevant, make sure it's good. One of my favorite tools is flowcharting, and it wasn't in the standard list from PMI. We will have some time in class to talk about process review, and we're going to make sure you have a good understanding of basic flowcharting as you complete your MBA program. Interviews. These are they're a good thing to do that. They're time consuming, and also you may have to really manage the time of these, and it takes a lot of skill. But talking to people is one of the best ways to understand what your stakeholders want and what you need to manage as part of the risk profile. While we don't have that for your project, one way we do is your lessons learned are from the company around you and all the information. So, but if you look at the notebooks that I bring to class with all the past projects, those are lessons learned. What did they do? What did it work for them? What kind of activities are in there? So lessons learned are captured after each project in a good company structure. They're stored and made available for you. And as you look at the project like that and move forward, go back and read the history. It's exciting stuff. Everyone is an expert on questionnaires, but sometimes they're hard to write. So a lot of times we'll see people say, I want to do a questionnaire. Again, it works. You may get some activity in it, but make sure you really understand what you're doing with the questionnaire and the cost trade-off of getting good questionnaires. And now the one that PMI likes the best, the risk breakdown structure. You had a WBS before, remember that? I hope so. Basically, it's a framework. And you basically, as you develop this framework of your areas of risk on your project, and they have to be tailored to the project, it gives you a good hint to where the issues could be. A lot of companies call this the heat map, and they have automated ways as they capture all their risk. The different areas of risk will highlight and go from the green to maybe an orange to a yellow to maybe a red for the hot areas. A good tool, and one that we want to make sure you're aware of as you get ready for your internships. This isn't the greatest copy in the world of a WBS, and it just gives you a hint of how the WBS would look, much like an organization chart, much like a WBS. Again, what you're looking for is areas of risk concern, and they vary by project, but a good way for you to communicate, analyze, and work on the risk structure. One of the best ways is called root cause analysis. I can summarize this. Learn to ask why 5 times. And as you ask why 5 times, you'll start digging in and understanding the problems and where you're going and the key things about the project activity. Again, root cause analysis, a good tool. Usually when you're looking at past information, this tool comes in. Here's a tool we introduced you to, your SWOT analysis. You remember your work on your own individual SWOT? A lot of projects you work on may have a SWOT also. So we introduced this tool so you would have a chance to use it and start building your toolbox. Again, a good tool. Another tool is a review of your WBS. Make sure you look at the task, what's going on. One of the favorite questions I like to ask, and I encourage you to learn to ask the same question in review meetings, what task or risk keeps you as a project manager or manager up at night worrying about the most? One of the reasons we introduced the PERT method to you was so you could get some idea to look at the evaluation of your risk profile using the PERT method. Again, that whole tab was to have you look at the ones with the highest variation to see where you're going. And by doing that, remember, we get our PERT estimate, we get our mean with 1 standard deviation. We basically come up with 84% probability of that task in finishing during that duration. A good tool and one you'll see again. Now we're going to go in the next area, and I've linked down at the bottom of the module this refers to in 516. This is called qualitative risk analysis, and we're going to call it risk assessment on our worksheet. In this slide, we're talking about our qualitative risk, or as we call it, risk assessment. Also, make sure you look for those opportunities. Opportunities are those chances to really make the project more valuable. So again, this is a place where you may find negative issues or you may find opportunities. So be aware of that. All this data should go in your risk register. Critical success factors in risk management are good definitions, so we try to define the terms we're using. That's where we work more on the risk management plan later on. High quality information, agreed upon approach, iterations are all important. All this is usually defined in a risk management plan, but for your small projects that you're working on, your team structure really should do a lot of that. Your RACI model helps also. So as you look at the risk process, you basically can summarize as we select, we collect, we prioritize, we categorize, and we document results and plans. Just a little summary how we're doing the risk process. Again, let's start the review of our tools using the standard format we have. Welcome to the P&I matrix. This is the most common tool used to analyze the risk you develop. As we look at our worksheet here in a minute, under the risk assessment, those definitions are in there for the P&I type activity. You should probably spend a few minutes with your team helping define, make sure you know what high, low, medium in the terms of the different areas are. But for right now, we'll just use the terms in there. This is a key tool. So when you're doing a standard project or a project on your own, one of the things you'll do in your risk management plan is you'll define the probability and matrix index. And there's many ways to do this, a very strong and good tool. Welcome back to our worksheet. And as we talked about earlier, when we're using Excel and you see these little red tabs in the upper right corner, these are comments. And these should explode. Oh, there it goes right there. And for this probability and impact matrix, someone has defined the probability of high, likely, somewhat unlikely, or probably not going to happen at all. So in this case, what do you think about Joe's availability? I think that's a 3. So let's put a 3 in here. Go from there. What do we think about zoning activities? What's the probability there? Boy, zoning, that's always a fun one to worry about. I think there is another 3 in that area there. So what about impact? Is it critical? Is it severe, moderate, or minimal? So again, as a team, go through and look at those and see what you see in that area. So what do you think about Joe and his impact? Well, you know what? I think it's going to be a 2. I think we can find a way around Joe and go from there. What if we don't get the zoning requirement? Let's go back and look at this again. If we don't get the zoning done, I think that's a 4. What do you think? And then we talk about detectability. Do we detect after impact has been realized? Do we realize upon triggering event? Do we immediately prior to the trigger event and determine well in advance? So let's look at Joe. I think with Joe, we'll probably know that pretty well in advance. And we look down here, what about the zoning activity? Let's go back and look at that again. And we're going to find that, that's kind of like the triggering activity. Sometimes you don't know what's going on with the zoning activity. Let's go through here and let's see, and look what happens. So by using a probability matrix, what we're doing is we're looking at trying to take all the risks we identified. I'm only doing 2, and you should probably do a lot more than that. But from the good statements you developed and the impact and the activity, we now have the most important thing for us is zoning. So in this case, what are we going to call zoning as a category? In the tool basically says it's used to identify such as technology, personnel, whatever. Remember the risk breakdown structure? Well, this would be the blocks that you'd use to build that. And I'm going to call this one legal. And up here, we're going to call that team, back here, team. So those are the areas. We've now completed risk assessment on our project. Again, we start with good risk ID, identification, then we go into risk assessment. The tool will help you do that. As a team, make sure you go through and clearly define. As a suggestion, maybe you want to go through on your slide set for your presentation and have a slide talking about how you look at risk, how you define these probabilities, and went from there. Okay, now we've captured all this good stuff, and now what are we going to do with it? So we really got to decide and how we're going to manage this data we found. Again, it's not just collecting data and writing papers and templates. You are an active leader of your team, and from this data, what are you going to do with it? Now, I'm a big believer in just do it. Look at the effects. You have the priority, balance with the stakeholder risk attitudes, and this is all usually driven from your risk management plan. So just get on the road and just cross that gorge and let's make it happen. So risk inside of the company, we basically look at how we develop those. They're inside the company structure. We really want to address the priority risk opportunities, and we have an agreed upon action be taken. And this may cause changes to budgets, resources, or scope. That triangle will be affected by what you discover in this process. Your action then is decide what are you going to do to minimize or manage the risk on your project. An area we'll talk about a little bit, it's called the risk owner. And the risk owner is there will be a triggering point. Each one has a risk owner who's going to be responsible for it, and there's called a risk action owner. And the owner is the person who owns in the racing model. The action owner is the one to make sure it gets done. Again, I always want to emphasize, no matter how hard you look at this and how hard you look at risk, there's always going to be residual risk, and there will be secondary risk. As you move something, something else may give. So be aware of that. Critical success factors for a good strategy are working with people, with planning, and analysis. Learn to use all those tools we have for you. So read through those roles on the people, the planning, and the analysis. This is one of the most critical slides in risk management, in any kind of management, and for your MBA program. When you find something, you're going to have either a risk or an opportunity. And if you have a risk, you have 4 choices. You can avoid it, you can transfer it, you can mitigate it, or you can accept it. On the opportunity side, you can exploit it, you can share it, you can enhance it, and you can accept it. And you'll notice the opportunities and risk are kind of parallel with each other in that area. These strategy points are key points for almost every management decision. So you need to understand this key area, not just use in this class, in this risk exercise, but throughout your MBA program. So let's practice that. Let's go back to our tab, look at that, and we'll update our risk register. As we return to our template, we see some new activity added. So the triggering event we have for Joe, which is the lower of the priorities, is around December 15th. And basically, we have the chance to mitigate the loss of Joe because we will, let me correct this one little typo here. To mitigate the risk, we'll go select a contractor. And basically our contingency plan is the funding for the contractor. The bigger issue we have is zoning. The triggering event will be the weekly zoning meetings with status. Basically, in this case, we accept the strategy that we can't control this. And the contingency plan is delayed until next year if we don't get it. So again, go back, remember that we talked about risk strategy. This risk register only deals with negative risk, but try to accept and use these terms in your metadata as you describe your activity. Are we going to avoid avoidance, transference, mitigate, acceptance? All key parts of this area. And kind of summarize what we used in the risk register. Again, we had our meta language on top, and our strategy is which one to address this with the following. So if you use the meta language and you follow up with this formatting that deals with your strategy, you really clearly communicate to your stakeholders, your team, your plan to move forward. This is a really good practice to get into because it really shows you understand what you're doing by strategy, you have a plan, and what you're going to do. And we continue on with our tool review in this area where we talk about risk response. Part of that is brainstorming. We've been through that before and we'll talk about it in demonstrate in class. Contingency planning. Remember we talked about Joe not being available? Well, our contingency is we'll have the money, hopefully more than just requested. If Joe's not available, we can go out and hire that contractor and make sure this program is on track. So again, in the right corner, you see this. Will the organization, are they willing to do this? Are they willing to give you that money up front to know what's going on? Again, we go back to talking to the stakeholders, interviews, help you really identify your risk responses. Boy, this planning stuff's a lot of work, and it kind of feels like you're blowing up a lot of steam to get that. But that's the easy part. Now let's move forward to how we monitor and control. It's too many projects I've seen have a great and wonderful project plan, powerful slides, communications, team kickoff meetings, but they do a terrible job of actually doing the work. So make sure you balance your project management, your MBA skills by not just planning your work, but getting the job done. And part of that in the PMI model is called monitoring and controlling. This is where you you're on the project and you're making sure that your plans are done day by day, week by week. This is your job. As a reminder, managing a project can be a long road. It takes time and just takes diligence to get there. So follow the road, you'll get to the top, and it'll be a great view. And you'll do a great job as an MBA. Thing you're looking for was does your plan work? Did you do it correctly? Did you review it? Did you update it regularly? Don't fall down here in this area. The key tasks of monitoring and controlling are to make sure you have the identified task. You monitor the residual risk. Remember those that are still there? You may have to identify new risk. You make sure your plans are executed and it's effective throughout the life cycle, over and over again, to manage risk until the day the project's delivered, your customer accepts it. That is your job. Tools to do that: risk audits. They can be formal. But a lot of times this is really important to go through and have that structured. But a lot of times people don't like to be audited, so be sensitive to the burden it places on the project team. But sometimes you may want to put that into your milestone that we'll be doing a risk audit every quarter. One of the reasons we see people have ISO standards is they define the process, and risk audits are a standard tool in that area. So as we look at that, one thing to check your status is basically your meetings. Have a status meeting. Again, we talk about good agendas, being structured, and being disciplined. Welcome back to our risk tab. In monitoring and controlling, we basically want to find out who the owner is, what is the status as of this date, what date it was entered, and the day to review. Sometimes formatting is fun in this Excel spreadsheets. So in this case, for Joe, our IT person, Mike Brown, the IT manager, is the owner of this. And the status is open, and we're going to review, the date was entered today, the 29th, and we're going to review this on the 15th. We want to keep track every 2 weeks. Well, let's go down to our really critical one, the zoning activity. Pete Jones from legal, that's his activity. It's definitely open, entered today, and we're going to review it every week because this is our most critical task. This is how you use this tool and how you develop it. So one of your major tasks will be to develop your risk register for your project. Identify enough risks to make sure we have a clear understanding of where your project's going. So as we enter the end of this presentation, what we do, did we monitor the risk as we built our project? Is this the house we wanted to build? This location we wanted to build? Did we understand all the risks, both the ones that were planned, the one occurred? Welcome to risk management, part of the MBA program.